Less than an hour ago, a new report analyzing election interference in the 2021 federal election was released. That release comes as pressure mounts on the Prime Minister to call an inquiry over allegations of foreign election interference in that campaign. But the Prime Minister has so far rebuffed those calls. Does this report quell concerns over interference or amplify them? Let's bring in our front bench panel to weigh in. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. This report today, it's kind of public. There's a bunch of committees. There's a panel that was struck to look into this issue, and this report was reviewing that panel's work. It came to the conclusion that what happened didn't affect the outcome of the election, but stuff did happen. What do you think? Does that further the calls for more to be done, or kind of dilute them or deflate them?
So I don't agree with your conclusion. I don't think that this report says that there is no impact on free and fair election. I think what it did do was it reviewed the protocol and did the protocol work. It doesn't bless whether or not there is any kind of free and fair election. I think what the author does do, though, he goes through in quite detail the importance of public confidence in a free and fair election. And what is happening right now is that people's confidence in elections, whether or not there's interference in the elections, is being shaken, is being rattled. And a report on a process that was set up by the government isn't going to make this issue go away at all. The underpinning has to be about public confidence in the system. There's too many questions coming from too many sources. And I think it does make sense that there be a public inquiry that is independent of the government and of parliamentarians put in place in order to ensure that the public does have confidence in our electoral system.
I raised a lot of those concerns, Mr. Mulcair, Tom, with Dominic LeBlanc off the top of the show, and sort of itemized some of the flags that the author of this report did point to. He kept circling back to the conclusion that the outcome, that all the stuff laid out did not affect the overall outcome, and that the processes in place were enough to combat whatever interference is happening. Do you buy that?
No, I don't. And I'm very much on the same page as Lisa Raitt with this one. It's the same thing that Mr. Trudeau tried to say last week. He said, well, the result of the election wasn't affected. Well, how can you affirm that when there's been no objective analysis of what's involved? And some of the people involved in doing these reports have a long history of connections to and with the Liberal Party. So I think that that is also part of the background. Canadians have a right to know whether the backbone of our democratic institutions, our voting process, our elections, was tainted, was affected by a foreign actor. And the information that's come out in the past couple of weeks, of course, wasn't available to the people writing this report necessarily. And the way to get to a result that people can believe is with some sort of contradictory process. You can't just have some people coming in and affirming the government's version when it's being brought out by the government itself, and everybody's supposed to go home and say, yeah, nothing to see here, everybody just move along. I don't think that that's going to wash. There's been too much information put forward. And it's interesting, Vassy, this afternoon I was listening to Bob Fife, the lead author in most of these articles. And he was on radio here in Montreal, and he was asked a straight-up question, so why do you think Mr. Trudeau's stonewalling? And his answer was very simple and clear. And he said, I think he's stonewalling because the Liberals stand to be hurt if all of this information comes out. Well, that's not a good enough reason to deprive Canadians of a proper process of full analysis. And this reminds me of something we went through again here in Quebec when Jean Charest tried to stonewall the creation of a commission of inquiry into corruption in the construction industry, and he was brought into it kicking and screaming, but it had to take place because there was just too much information in the public space about what had been going on. It's the same thing here. There's too much information out there for the government to come along and just try to put a lid on it and say, we're not going to look at this any further. Canadians are not going to buy it.
Brian, we had Fred Delory, who ran the 2021 campaign, on the show just a few minutes ago, and he was pretty clear. He's like, I'm not saying that the election was stolen. I'm not saying that I'm not ascribing motive to the Liberals or saying that they're behind it. But is there not an opportunity here for everyone to actually, I know we always say it, but to actually do it and just take away your partisanship, sit down and say, like, what really happened? Do you think that is necessary, given, as Tom and Lisa both point out, the amount of information that's out there right now?
It 100% is necessary. The only thing I would say is that an inquiry is one mechanism. I'm a bit surprised to what extent the discourse, and look, it's very clearly there's not many dissenting voices that an inquiry shouldn't be called, but I'm a bit surprised to what extent people aren't satisfied with a multi-partisan committee or parliament looking into this. There is obviously some great discourse, some great points made that there's a committee looking at it, but doesn't necessarily have the clearance necessary. So some are arguing it should be sent to the Parliamentary Committee on National Security and Intelligence, which would have some clearance to be able to see some of the documents. So that, I think, would make a lot of sense from my point of view as a venue to be able to look into the matter. We obviously had the report that came out with the panel. And look, I think politically speaking, I don't see how the Prime Minister is really going to kind of get away from this one, though, because there's going to have to be something else done. And look, it's a bit of an unforced error. I mean, the video a few months back where the Prime Minister mentioned to President Xi that, stop interfering with our elections. So that's sort of out there in the public domain. It was a moment that probably could have been good had we sort of known here in Canada that there was something happening, and that could have been a moment where he was standing up to the president. But now it's kind of just sort of like, okay, well, you've known since then. And so now it's kind of put some things into question, and everybody's sort of pouncing, and obviously the opposition is pouncing. So I don't see how he doesn't do something pretty strong, most likely some version of an inquiry. But honestly, if I were sort of going from the beginning of this, I don't think the inquiry would have been necessary. I think a parliamentary committee, amongst maybe some other actions taken, would suffice in this case.
Yeah, I think that the issue that people have brought up, Rob, with the parliamentary committee is the partisan nature of those committees, and that it wouldn't have the same, I don't know if heft is the right word, but the same ability that a judge-led inquiry or something of an independent mechanism might have. That's so far, I guess, the concerns that people have raised. And even if the Prime Minister wanted to use the vehicles that he currently has at his disposal to do that investigating, if he had at the outset said, hey, this is a concern to me too, this does seem like something's up, something's wrong, I get why people want more answers, instead of kind of saying, don't worry, there's nothing to see here, a lot of this kind of blowback might have been mitigated.
Exactly, Vassy. And you know what, I agree with Lisa, Tom, and Brian. The Prime Minister needs to do more to clear the air. I also worry because there's so much conjecture flying around in a lot of these reports in newspapers and websites. And I'm troubled by some of the CSIS leaks because, for example, one of them suggests that the Chinese government tried to manipulate a nomination meeting here in Toronto by bussing in people to vote for a candidate. Well, that suggests to me that CSIS has never covered any nomination meetings or ever been to a nomination meeting in the Greater Toronto area, because every party, whether it's the Liberals or the Tories, yet New Democrats to a lesser extent, I'll say this for Tom's party, but Liberals and Tories have been packing nomination meetings at the GTA forever and ever. Amen. So this is not, if this is news to CSIS, it's just to me that their idea of foreign interference and maybe ours is slightly different. So this is the thing. But again, it's up to the Liberal government to clear the air. We have all of these leaks coming from CSIS, mid-level CSIS operatives who are clearly leaking this stuff. Some of it may be true, some of it may be not true, but I think that we deserve to know for sure what's real and what isn't real.